Donald Trump says he is ending trade discussions with Canada and will soon impose a blanket tariff on all this country's products. This is in response to Ottawa's digital services tax, a tax Trump calls egregious.
They did something with our tech companies today trying to copy Europe. You know, they copied Europe. It's not going to work out well for Europe either, and it's not going to work out well for Canada. They were foolish to do it. And so I said we're going to stop all negotiations with Canada right now until they straighten out their act.
Host of CBC's Power and Politics, David Cochran, has been following this all day and joins us now with more. David, what can we take away from Trump's comments in online and in the Oval Office?
Dan, honestly, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't like the digital services tax. I think that much is clear. We've known that from the American tech giants and the American government for quite some time. But does this actually mean trade talks are over and a new tariff is coming in a week? I don't know. The president has a habit of making big claims like this, and then it doesn't always follow through, though maybe he's more emboldened during this second term and the second mandate. But we are about 12 days into, or 11 days into, the 30-day time period that the president and Prime Minister Mark Carney agreed to try to close a deal of some sort to get through this latest tariff battle. And it didn't last 2 weeks, despite the goodwill that was on display in Kananaskis at the G7. So what happens now isn't at all clear to me, because my conversations with people in the Canadian government today, in about an hour or so before Donald Trump posted this, was that they thought things were going okay. They were making progress. The conversations at the bargaining table were getting more precise, and they felt like things were moving along at a faster pace than they had at any point up to that sit-down between the president and the prime minister at the G7. So every sort of like Truth Social post and declaration like this from the president, creates a bit of a mushroom cloud. And we need to wait for this dust to settle right now to see exactly where things are going to go, because there's a lot of confusion, a lot of anxiety, not a lot of clarity, and it's going to take a little bit of time before that all gets sorted out.
We heard briefly from the Prime Minister earlier. How else has the federal government responded, at least now?
Yeah, the response has been basically to not respond, right? Chalking this up is essentially to a tactic in a negotiation. The Prime Minister very calmly came out today and said, we're in the middle of a negotiation. We're going to negotiate the best deal for Canada. Now, the digital services tax may, in fact, very well be a key part of those negotiations. It might be something that you're trading back and forth. Who knows? But this is a very tight ship under the Carney government, a very tight circle when it comes to the direct conversations with the United States on what they're doing here. But they are not responding publicly or dramatically until they get a truly clear sense of exactly what this means. And then they'll calibrate the response based on that. I would expect, though, the president and the prime minister, if they haven't spoken by now, there will almost certainly have to be some sort of a conversation in the coming days to try to see exactly where this is to get it back on track if they can.
David, do you think any of this comes as a surprise? The digital services tax is not a surprise. It's been around for a while.
Yeah, it comes into force on Monday. The issue's been around for a while. The president said today they just learned about it, which is not what his Treasury Secretary said, saying that we knew about it. We just kind of hoped Mark Carney wouldn't go ahead with it because he's not Justin Trudeau, and they were hoping that Canada would do them a solid in the middle of a trade war that the Americans started. So it's a surprise that it became such a fundamental thing today. I spoke with Jean Charest earlier today. He's obviously the former Quebec premier, former national political leader, and one of the Canada-U.S. advisors to the government. The digital services tax has been there. It just hasn't been this central and fundamental. So I think it's a surprise that it got to this. It's not a surprise that Donald Trump made a provocative and disruptive statement on social media, the implications of which are not entirely clear.
And we wait to see and hear more information. David Cochran, host of Power and Politics in Ottawa. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Dan.
This news understandably also prompting reaction south of the border. Our Sam Sampson has been following this story from Washington. Sam, thanks for joining us. Can you walk us through the details on Trump's announcement?
Yes, let's dig into what he wrote on Truth Social earlier this afternoon. So he wrote that Canada just announced its use of the digital services tax on American technology companies. And look at this, he calls it a blatant attack on our country. He goes on to write, based on this egregious tax, we are hereby terminating all discussions on trade with Canada effective immediately. There's also a statement later on about letting Canada know its tariff in the next week, which, as David already mentioned, is kind of concerning because Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney already agreed at the G7 on a 30-day timeline to figure out some kind of trade dispute agreement. So this kind of casts a shadow of doubt on that 30-day timeline. The thing is, this tax didn't just happen today. As you've already mentioned, I mean, the idea of this tax existed for years. It goes back to 2019 from the Liberal government at the time. The only thing timely about this tax is that the first payments are due Monday. And we also got a sense of, from the Trump government, or rather administration, that they thought, again, maybe because it was a different Liberal leader, that maybe Canada wouldn't go through with it. And we know that because we heard it today.
We were hoping, as a sign of goodwill, that the new Carney administration would at least put a brake on that during the trade talks. They seem not to have. President Trump has responded, and my inclination is that Ambassador Greer over at USTR will be starting a 301 investigation into the digital services taxes to determine the amount of harm to the U.S. companies and the U.S. economy in general.
So to recap there, they thought that maybe Canada wouldn't go through with this. It's unclear if the Canadian government knew that that was the hope, especially because of that 30-day agreement that the two world leaders made at the G7 summit back in Kananaskis.
And Sam, why do you think the Americans are so concerned about this bill beyond what they've already said?
Well, money is one thing. The digital services tax will hit companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, Uber, Airbnb. You look at my phone, all the apps, they might be affected. They're going to be hit with a 3% levy on revenue from Canadian users, and it will apply retroactively back to 2022. So the first bill due on Monday, we're looking at about $2 billion US. Now, you heard there about a potential investigation. Well, the Computer and Communications Industry Association, which is a nonprofit representing several tech and comms firms internationally, it estimates that these measures will lead to annual losses of between $900 million and $2.3 billion US a year, and firms could there could be a loss of about 3,000 US jobs. So it is pushing for an investigation into the tax. In a statement, its president and CEO called the tax unfair and discriminatory, saying the decision to enact the tax undermines not only a key US export sector, but also bilateral trade ties between two critical partners. Now, if you remember as well, Trump has been very protective of the technology industry in his country. He even made exemptions on tariffs at one point, so companies like Apple wouldn't have to pay extra for their phones made in China. So in some ways, it's no surprise that he's against this tax. What is surprising, as we've already heard, is he waited until the last minute to drop such a hammer.
All right. Sam Sampson in Washington. Sam, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, for more analysis on this, we're joined by former diplomat Lawrence Herman. He's an international trade lawyer and a senior fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute. He joins us from Toronto. Lawrence, thanks for being here. What went through your mind when you heard Donald Trump make these announcements?
Well, I thought it was outrageous and appalling that's the way Mr. Trump acts with respect to a close trading partner. But look, we're dealing with an unstable, erratic president, and we have to accept that. The question is, where do we go from here? But look, I should outline a couple of important things. First of all, we are not, by enacting this tax, in breach of any trade agreement or any treaty. If we were, he could have a case that we've, offended our legal obligations. There's no treaty, no agreement, no rule of international law, no agreement, as I said, that Canada is offending. So that's the first point. Nothing that we have done that is infringing our trade obligations. Secondly, as your commentary pointed out earlier, this tax has been around for 2 years. It's not a surprise, or should not have been a surprise to the United States. The other thing is, if they were so concerned about this, it could have been on the agenda for the ongoing trade negotiations and could have been signaled that this was going to be a problem in ongoing negotiations. But there was nothing said about it officially by the United States for months and months and months. So this comes at the last moment. And the other thing that is important is that 40 other countries have digital service taxes, including many European countries, France, Austria, Italy, Spain. The UK has a digital services tax, and the Americans agreed, or Trump and Prime Minister Starmer agreed that they would go forward with a new agreement, no mention of the UK digital services tax. So the whole thing strikes me as being erratic, back of the envelope kind of reaction. As I said before, I think Canada should go forward with this measure, even though there are those who think it was inappropriate and inopportune, but we have no choice. We have to go the course, and to retreat at this point under these kinds of outrageous threats would be the wrong move.
Given you say that this came in at almost the last minute, the tax is not a new entity that the United States would not have been privy to. What does that say, do you think, about the state of negotiations?
Well, it just shows how erratic the White House is and the president himself, that this sort of thing would come up at the last minute. And not only that, to suggest that it is an attack on U.S. companies is wrong. It's non-discriminatory. As I said before, there's no indication that this breaches any of Canada's international obligations. It is not discriminatory. It applies across the board. It is perfectly consistent with our trade agreements. But I think what you have here is sort of a reaction at the spur of the moment, and the use of a quick social media posting to try to hammer Canada, which he's trying to do. And it is just not the way mature countries should treat one another in their ongoing trade relations.
Lastly, Lawrence, we appreciate your time. If you're in that room with Canada's officials negotiating this trade deal, and possibly with the Prime Minister, what's your advice to them?
Well, as I said before, I think under the circumstances, Canada should stay the course. We have a policy, and we should continue with that policy. But we could, at the same time, say there are things that both countries need to negotiate. There are lots of things the Americans do that we don't agree with. Let's sit down and see whether we can sort this out and come to some kind of conclusion that mature democratic countries should be doing with one another. That's the way to approach this. But to threaten Canada with tariffs and to talk about an attack on U.S. industry is just unacceptable. It's a foolish response on the part of the president. And I think, as I said before, the Canadian government should coolly, reasonably proceed with this measure, and Mr. Carney and the president should have a serious discussion about where we go from here.
Lawrence Herman, former diplomat and international trade lawyer, a senior fellow at the City Howe Institute. We appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.